It's my honor this morning to introduce one of my favorite speakers, author, educator, designer, entrepreneur, and father. All of these titles can be attached to Maxwell Ryan, who's the founder of Apartment Therapy. If you're not aware, is a wonderful site that helps people make their homes more beautiful, organized, and healthy. And if you know Maxwell, you can add to those titles a really nice guy because he is truly a joy to work with, and we're glad to have him. After leaving the world of education, he became an interior designer in New York City, where he began an email list of helpful tips and recommendations that he sent out to clients about their homes. And what started as a simple email has become one of the most successful and influential home design blogs in the world. Apartment Therapy, along with its sister site, The Kitchen, has more than 15 million monthly visitors. If you've never perused their site, you're missing a wealth of highly useful information. Their ideas are insightful and often inventive, from how to chicly design a 100-square-foot studio to 15 ingenious uses for wax paper. Most recently, Maxwell led Apartment Therapy on a cross-country makeover tour in Westy, their trusty Westphalia Vanagon, making stops to beautify homes from Boston to Austin and beyond. Maxwell received his bachelor's from Oberlin College and master's degrees from both Columbia University and Antioch. He can regularly be seen in the media from HGTV to House Beautiful, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal, and beyond. Up next on Maxwell's agenda is his fourth book, entitled Complete and Happy Home, which was published this fall and is already a New York Times bestseller. Please help me welcome Maxwell Ryan.
Thank you, Mary Lee. Can you hear me? Yeah. Good. Thank you. What is the difference between roast beef and pea soup? Anyone know? This is a millennial joke, so maybe you don't know. You can roast beef. So thank you very much for having me here. I thought I'd just start off with that, my favorite joke. So you're getting it. I'm glad. Thanks to Pamela Kelly for hosting and to Mary Lee for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about apartment therapy, give you some background. I'm going to talk about millennials. I'm going to talk about Martha. And then it's going to be open for questions. And I hope you feel free to really think about your questions, because I think I'm going to open up the subject, but I may not answer the questions that you have in your head. So the dawn of a new century, rise of the millennials, and the fall of Martha Stewart. Where do I start? Number one, and this is a bit of a list. I heart Terence Conran. Terence Conran is my inspiration. It's where I started. He, for those of you who know him, he was a designer in England, still is, but he was really much more global in that he went into, his first thing he opened was a restaurant. He opened a restaurant in London after the war, and the idea was to give people a good, healthy, affordable meal. So it was called the Soup Kitchen, and it had basically three things. It had a soup, fresh bread, and, as he said, the only espresso machine in England at the time. For him, and then he of course is the person behind Conran, the store, designing furniture. He also started Habitat, which was a much more affordable version, which he sold to IKEA. And he's opened restaurants and stores around the world. I think the core of his business actually is in designing office space and hotels. It's really an enormous thing. He also has written over 40 books. And so that was what inspired me, that the home is really the center, and that he saw the home as being a balance between design and food. He wrote in his first book in 1974, having a warm home that looks good and that you and your family and friends enjoy must be one of the most worthwhile things in life, and to help you achieve it is the object of this book. I love this quote. It's included in our last book. And I think when we talk about the home, we often think of it as a decorative place, but I don't think of it that way. I want to think of it as a place that's really a foundation for your life. This is some pages from the book. And what you may notice is that these are not sterile rooms. They're rooms with people in them. If you've done a book and an interior design book, the first thing the publisher will say is, we don't want people in the book. Don't have any people in the book. Because they think people date books, and so they don't want that to happen. But Conran did it. Now, not all of the pages had people, but they were homes to be lived in. They were also homes that were not perfectly styled. The sheets were a little wrinkly, and they expressed a personal style. The wonderful thing about the house book is that if you went through it now or as a kid, you'd find the home that you loved. There were many points of entry, and that's my area of inspiration. I think that the home is a very personal space. He also then put out the kitchen book, and similarly, it charted the history of the kitchen and gave sort of entry points for everyone to make their kitchen their own. That's where I'm going to go today, and that's where I'm going to end up. Because your home is a path and not a place. It's not a static square foot thing that you rent or buy or live in. The home, for me, is a place you inhabit, and it keeps changing. And it is as much your path as you have a path in your life. So it has to be expressing you personally. I mean, it has to keep changing. This is from our last book, and the bookcase, but a very personal bookcase. This is another bookcase. This is Karl Lagerfeld's bookcase. And I love this picture. It's so personal, it's so inspiring, and you have to wonder, how do you get the books out, right? They're all flat. This is from the latest book. This is in California, in LA. An amazing landscape designer. And this is her home. She made those tables, the table, the chairs, and she designed the whole thing, and it sits under that great pepper tree. We're all looking for our own path. Again, this is sort of the root of what we do. I think people in today's world are all looking to find meaning. I think, Laura, you spoke to that. And so when we're doing our work, we're looking to meet people in that search for meaning in their lives. I can't tell you how many people who've come to me over the years and said, I'm doing a career transition, can I talk to you? I don't know if that's particular to now or it's always been that way, but I feel like once you understand that our lives are paths and that we're changing and we're all looking for it, and it's always just out ahead of us, I think you start to understand people better, and you also understand how the home supports that. That's just a picture of a path that I like. So my path. My path has been twisty and turny. Most paths are. And just to give you an example, I started off, twisty and turny this is another slide of twisty and turny. Why are most things twisty and turny? And I'm sort of going to run along with this, and you can ask me questions later. A lot of people think when someone speaks, or they get such a nice introduction as I got today, that this person must have known exactly what they were going to do since they were born. And from my experience, and one of the wonderful things about my job is I get to interview lots of people, is that the most successful people, it's never the case. Most successful people, there's an element of will, and there's also an element of serendipity in how you find your path. And the degree to which you're good at knowing that that's reality and that you can navigate that and not be put off by it is the degree to which I think you'll be successful. Energy, when it travels through space, and this is sort of comes from feng shui and also in my background in Waldorf, it wants to travel in a meander. And a meander is not a straight line and not a spiral, but a back and forth. So it's a straight and a curve, a straight and a curve. And if you look at energy in the natural world, whether it's captured in water or air, on sand, etc., you'll see these shapes. So this is an overview of the Mississippi River, and it gives you an idea of what a meander looks like. Rivers are particularly interesting because they do form oxbows, which is when the meander goes off and it gets stuck, and then the water starts to rot, for lack of a better word. but then the river will cut it off and keep going. If you take a river like in California and you concrete the sides of it so that you make it go straight, the life force of the river, that what it can support, will die. It is not, it wants to move in that shape, and when it does, it's healthy. You see it all over. You see that in air. This is smoke, and this is water. It's ink in water. And actually, all of this comes from this amazing book. Theodore Schwenk just completely documents it, how energy wants to move and how it's captured you can see it in the natural world. Interestingly enough, if you think of copper pipes in your house with water running through it, and they look straight, inside the copper pipe, the water is actually twisting and turning as it gets to your tap. I'm just fascinated by this. Because if you get to interior design, the way you want to move through a room is a meander. Never a straight line, and never an oxbow, as it were. So, and when I deal with people in their homes, that's typically what I see. I see the people who've got so much clutter you can't move, and I see the people who think they've got it all figured out, so they put everything up against the walls, and they have a bowling alley right down the middle of the room. What else is like a meander? Businesses are like a meander, not just life. One of my favorite stories is the story of American Express. And for those of you who don't know, it started as a Pony Express company. It was job was to carry things from one town to another. And then they discovered that people wanted to send money, and then there was a problem because you could be robbed. So they created a traveler's check. So someone would give them the money in point A, they'd write the check, the horse would carry the check, and they could cash it in at the end. And if it was stolen or there's a problem, no one lost their money. So that turned in, what started as a delivery business turned into a financial business. And the story of American Express is amazing because it continues to change. It's also now a travel business. And so when I think about business, and that's where I'm going to go as well today, I think you have to look for where your business is pulling you, and don't get stuck in thinking it's just one thing. There's a meander behind business growth as well. So on that meander, all good paths have missions. And I think this is really important. While you are meandering, if you don't have sort of a mission, for lack of a better word, you have no North Star. And that will, then you can really be off, you can get off the path. My mission, I was lucky enough to receive on my graduation from high school. This is a picture. I went to a boarding school in Andover, Mass. Called Phillips Academy. And this is a picture of, not my graduation, but probably close to it now, I don't know. But it's actual graduation years ago. But best graduation I ever went to, we were all sitting in our chairs, 400 of us, thinking about how soon we were going to be given our diploma so we wouldn't, it's a boarding school, so there's lots of rules, right? You can't go anywhere or do anything, but the second you get your diploma, you're free. So we're all sitting in the audience going, when am I going to get out of here? We're going to party, we're going to have a great time. And the board of trustees head stood up and he said, by the way, they didn't hire a speaker, they didn't hire some sports star or something like that to tell us, give us thoughts or something like that. He said, you have all been, had the advantage of this education, private education, very expensive, remarkable education, actually. It's an amazing school. He sort of caught our attention. He said, you've all had the luck, or the, I don't know what the right word is, someone knows the word. Fortune, the good fortune, yeah. I'm in Santa Fe, it's the altitude. You've had the good fortune to receive this education. And now you have a job to do. Your job is to give it back. And I was stunned because we had, in a sense, they were brilliant. They gave us a homework assignment at that moment when we were the last thing we were thinking about. But it has sunk into this day, is that was my job, to give it back and to share, in a sense, the gifts that I had received with whoever I came across in my life. And so that's always been what guides me. And it's a super simple assignment, and I love that. I started my life right out of college in design. I worked for Raymond Waits. Some of you know him. And he's wonderful and crazy. But at the time I was just out of college, I started off by being really excited, then I got disillusioned because he was super decorative. It was I'll never forget, it was July, he took a few of us to his apartment, and he sent me first to the store to buy plastic fruit and glitter, and we went to his apartment, we started rolling the plastic fruit in glitter and gold and silver, and he held it up and he said, "This is fabulous. This is going to be our Christmas stuff thing product." And I was like, oh my God, I can't do this for my life. So but I didn't know what else to do, so I ended up going back to school and became a teacher, and I taught elementary school for 7 years. And this book was written by my 5th grade teacher, and he was another mentor of mine. And I just love that he wrote that book, and he passed away a few years ago, but that's what I ended up doing. I ended up, for most of my years, in the Waldorf schools, and if you're familiar with Waldorf, they're it's a very, very deep and very expansive curriculum. Teacher training is very intense. It takes years. And what particularly resonated with me is that you're taught as a teacher that the actual room, the environment, has a strong impact on the students. So it has to be right. And there's all sorts of things about it, from color to light to shape of pencil to the chairs, the desks, that make a difference. And it was the first time I'd really come into contact with interior design, not for decorative purposes, but for educational purposes, to support our inner life. And if you see this, if you're familiar with Waldorf classrooms, they look a little weird because they don't have any right angles in them. One of the things Steiner said was, as the eye moves around the room, when it hits a typical modern right angle at any corner, it stops. And so you don't want that flow to stop, again, going back to the sense of meander. And so in Waldorf rooms, whenever possible, they cut off all the corners, so the movement never stops. Interestingly enough, the Greeks did this too. Columns were designed to hold up buildings, and the cornices got super elaborate because they felt that if a column hit a ceiling, that was a disruption, a visual, spiritual disruption. And so the cornice was meant to soften it and make the meeting of the two shapes healthy. So this is a classroom. This is the Goetheanum in Switzerland. This is the center of sort of anthroposophy. Steiner was responsible for not just for education, but out of it came organic farming, companies like Weleda, Dr. Hauschka, the Eurythmics. So the eurythmy is a movement taught in the schools, and Annie Lennox was a Waldorf student. Many, many things in many, many different directions. This is another classroom. You can see it looks a little weird. The colors of the walls are important. Depending on what grade you're in, there's a different color for each classroom. And the earliest color is magenta. And as the children get older, they move towards a dark blue. There's a long story behind that, which is fascinating, which goes to that in the beginning of the world, humans were only able to see one color, which was magenta. And as we've grown, evolved as a civilization, we now can differentiate many more colors than earlier peoples could. And an interesting example of that is in Greek poetry. The famous Greek poets, who you will tell me their name, who wrote about Odysseus traveling across the sea. To them, the sea was wine dark. It was red. It wasn't blue the way we see it. And that's how they describe their ocean. So apartment therapy's mission, similar to my high school mission, is to be of service. And while it comes from what I felt was my job, it's not just to be a goody-goody, because I think when you have a business, the basic role of a business is to solve a problem. If you're not solving a problem, I don't think you're going to be in business for very long. And there are many of those. So with my people in my company, we focus on, are we solving a problem? Because if we are, we're bringing value, and we will, if we do a good job, we will be in business for a long time. And that's sort of, to go back to American Express, my goal with apartment therapy, and you were asking Lori, what does she want to do in 5 years? My goal with apartment therapy would be that it lives for 100 years after me. So, and that will only happen if the culture is focused on solving a problem. It can't be a vanity project that's really about me. And that's why I love the American Express story. Cut to, what do? We work in design. I believe design is the new food. I started apartment therapy in 2001, and since then I have seen an explosion in interest in how people put their homes together and where things come from. I think of design, and I say the new food, I think this country, as it's gotten more mature, has spent more time developing, educating itself in areas that it didn't used to as much. To give you an example, food, I think, we've become a gourmet country. We've totally overdone it with regard to what we know about our food, both on the health side and on the gourmet side. And as an example, I think my father, in the 50s or 60s, remember his dinner for him used to consist of steak, lettuce, usually iceberg, and red wine. And it was always a bottle of Bola, big one like that. And so, but the same guy, which is sort of me, now, years later, if you ask a guy what is he having for dinner, he's likely to say, well, I think I'll have the hanger steak with the arugula lettuce and a Pinot Noir, because I know that goes well with it. So I think we've become incredibly knowledgeable about food, but we've also, trailing that is design. And so now people want to know, how are things made? And we've talked about that today. They want to know who the designers are. They want to know where the designers come from, their life stories. They want to know, they think it's cool that Philip Stark is Philip Stark and that he's behind the ghost chair. There's a tremendous rise in sort of self-education around design, and people really care about it. And I don't think apartment therapy would exist if that were not happening. This is a picture from the new book. This is a young woman who works at J. Crew and lives in Brooklyn. And this is her bedside. This is all her. Amazing. There's another young woman who lives in an old tenement in Manhattan. It's from the new book, I should explain. All the homes in the new book are designed by the people themselves. This is Los Angeles. This is Texas. And those people in those homes, some of them they're all between 20 and 40, made it themselves, did it themselves, and care a lot about their interior. They know the colors of paints they used on the wall, they know where the furniture came from, and they also know if they made things, how they made them, and where they got the instructions. Cut to blogs changed everything. Apartment therapy started in 2001. I started the blog in 2004, and I have to say, I also wouldn't be here if the internet hadn't come along. It has been an incredible ride. It is still going, and blogs basically decimated the print world, the magazine world in particular, in our space, and have had just sort of a rocket rise as people have now just go and consume and read online before they go to the newsstand and buy a magazine. Here is a picture of our traffic through July. The kitchen, our cooking site, is the yellow one. This is apartment therapy. And the combined, you can see there. The growth, but I'm going to show you some other growth pictures in a second, but what's remarkable about this, besides the rise, is if you look at the kitchen, the food side, food people are crazy. That's another thing. They come to the site 3 times a day. At office, by the way, our prime time, I hate, as a former teacher, this is the worst thing to say, but our prime time, television prime time is about, 6 to 9 in the evening, something like that. Our prime time starts at 9 a.m. when you get to the office, and it goes till 5 p.m. when you leave. And so food people, they go online during the day, and they say, what am I going to cook tonight? What am I going to do? And then they go to the store, and they pull out their phone, again, go to the site, they get the recipe to shop for it, and then they go home, and while they're cooking it, they pull up their tablet and they cook it. So they're 3 times a day they're coming to the site. It's amazing, every single day. So that's why you see the food traffic is just crazy, and that's true of the whole space. I'm going to talk about Time Inc. in a second and talk about the fellow who started it, but this is Time Inc., for those of you who don't know, is the largest, most successful publishing company in the world in the last century. However, and I'm talking specifically now about the print side, all the magazines. If you look at this image from Quantcast, you can see where the traffic is going. They are dying fast. And this gets to my where I'm going to go right in a second about millennials and what is actually happening. The voices of the last century are fading out. They are not speaking to this new century that is starting. So this is, Time Inc. Is dying before our eyes. It's remarkable to watch. This is our traffic based on the same metric. That's their traffic. This graph is not going in a good direction. This graph is going in a good direction. I'm very happy with it. Other interesting thing to point out is the dark blue here is the mobile traffic, and the light blue is the desktop traffic. So if you think about how are we growing, it's entirely mobile. Everyone's on their phone. Everyone is consuming everything now mobily, and that's where everything is going. Why is this happening? The Time Inc. has not made a move to the web. They failed to move to the web, so that's why they're dying. But why is the web taking over the world? Mark Andreessen said this in 2011. Did I do that? Fred. He said, in short, software is eating the world. So you have to think about every single thing that we did 10, 20 years ago. Every single thing is now turning into a digital equivalent. Everything. So you take music. Music used to be on a record. Now it's inside the computer. Take books. They used to be on paper. Now they're inside a tablet. Everything is going in that direction. So if you want to think about something that's still living out in the world in some tangible form, it will become software eventually. That's what's happening. It is unstoppable. Social, blogs started it, internet started. Social changed it again. This has been, all of our growth in the last 2 years has been due to social media. This is a graph that shows the rise of Pinterest in terms of unique visitors. Off the charts. Absolutely crazy. Mobile and video are changing everything now. I showed you how mobile is really all of our growth. Video is happening right now. And this speaks to millennials. If I wanted to look something up, I'd go to Google and I'd say how to make pancakes, and I would get a recipe and I would read it. What I've been told is a millennial will go to YouTube and say how to make pancakes and watch the video. On their phone, by the way, because there's not desktop anymore. So Mary Meeker is sort of a very smart person who talks about the internet. She does a study every year, and she brings forward everything that she's thinking and seeing. And this is mobile global internet advertising. As you can see, this graph is growing very healthily. And what's interesting about it is the mobile segment is growing too. The mobile segment is not growing as fast, however, as people are moving to mobile. So you're going to see, that's why our mobile ads stink. You're going to see a tremendous amount of change, I think, on your phones as people try to figure out how to do a better job with that very small space. Time spent per adult user per day with digital media. As you can see, it is growing. And the biggest part is the light green, the mobile. Millennials are driving the mediums and therefore the content. As much as we live in a culture where there's a cultural conversation going on, the cultural conversation is usually, you remember when you're in high school, The conversation of your class was driven by the most popular kids in the class, and you had to suffer through it, whether you liked it or not. Well, we have that as a culture, and so the baby boomers basically controlled the cultural conversation for many, many years. And then the Gen Xers came along, and I'm a Gen Xer, but we were a much smaller group, so we sort of have to live in the shadow of the boomers, and we didn't really quite dominate the cultural conversation very much. But now the millennials are a very big group, and they're rising swiftly, and so their conversation is becoming our conversation. And as a business person, what I'm going to argue is that if you want to be in business in 25 years, you need to plant a flag right now in that generation, because they will be your future customers for the next 25 years, and the others won't. This is another graph of Mary Meeker. Millennials surpassed Gen Xers as largest generation in the US labor force. And as you can see, they're just getting started because millennials are 18 to 32. It's a very young demographic. And so it is growing quickly as it enters the labor force. What's next? Terence Conran, as much as I love him, he's done. But he left he's left with a lot of amazing things, and I still take inspiration from him. He wrote at the end of that same thing, "The purpose of this book is to help you, but what no book can do is ensure that your home reflects your own personality. That's your job." The most amazing thing about this is that when he wrote those books, he gave you, in a sense, your homework assignment, which is use this book to make it your own. And that was the genius of Terence Conran, I think. And the person who didn't say that, I'm gonna go up here, was her. It was really all about her. And millennials don't care about that. They want it to be about them. So Terence Conran, I think, still would speak to a millennial generation because he gave forward the book and said, make it your own, do with it what you want to. In fact, you should. And that, I think, is the most important thing, if I could get that across. However, he's done. Crate and Barrel, amazing, amazing company, started by a couple. Tell me their names, him and his wife, them. They're done. Done. Williams-Sonoma, done. HGTV, done. Martha, done. And Henry Luce, Time Inc. If you want to read an amazing story, read this book. Came out last year. It's about Time Inc., the growth of Time Inc. He started Time magazine out of college with a partner. They were 23 years old. They were the millennials of a previous century. And they started Time magazine. Time magazine was meant to be what you could read if you had no time, because time was short, modern civilization. So what did they do? They went around and they took stories from all the other newspapers and they copied them. They cut them down, copied them, and put them in a magazine. And it was like blogging, because when we started blogging, we just copied stuff and sort of edited it and curated it for people. Now we have to write stuff, but it's the exact same thing. That century, an amazing century. He wrote in the middle of it. He wrote after the war. He was the person who wrote the essay that called the last century the American century. And he said that after the war, with the fall, sort of even though we won the war, Europe was done. It was America's century to rise to prominence and sort of take care of the world and also to uphold the ideals of democracy. And I think it's an amazing story, and I think it was very true, but we're in a new century now. New century, let's talk about where we're going. Y'all know Tay-Tay? So this is Taylor Swift and her buddies. And if you read the paper today, Adele has a new album coming out, and everyone's waiting to see if she's going to stream it or not. And Taylor Swift, just last year, refused to stream her album and didn't put it on Spotify, and I'm not sure if it's on Apple Music, or she held it off for a long time. And so the whole industry is waiting to see what this one, right now, Adele's going to say after Taylor said what she said last year, and all the other artists are holding their breath. And what they want her to say probably is, don't stream it, because when you stream it, you don't make as much money, and that's because that whole industry, the software has eaten up that industry. It's completely disrupted. But if the other people are done, I'm going to show you the people that are rising, and not necessarily these are going to be, Taylor's not going to be Martha Stewart, but within this group of people is going to be the ferment out of which the Terence Conrans and the Martha Stewarts and the Henry Luces and the Crate & Barrels all arise. And the cool thing for the people in this room, and I don't want to get you too down because not many here are 23, they look up to us. They look up to people older. They're not so self-involved that they think that they can do everything themselves. They're aspirational, but they need guidance. And everyone who's looking for true guidance looks above. And so I see my role, I'm 49, I see my role is to tune into this generation, be there for them, to be of guidance, in a sense, but it's not about me. And I think that's the relationship that they're seeking as they move into the world and look for guidance, and it's going to come from above. So you got Taylor, you got the Biebs and Skrillex on the left. Now some lesser-known stars. This is Girls with Glasses from YouTube. Literally, these are two Mormon moms who are models, ex-models, and they went on YouTube and started just talking to the camera, and they release a video every week, and they're called Girls with Glasses, and they have 30,000 followers, which means that companies will come to them and pay them their living to promote their products in front of their 30,000 people, which is not 1 million or 2 million, but their 30,000 people are so rabid that there's instant loyalty to whatever they speak about. And then Joy the baker in the food space. Joy lives in New Orleans, and she is a baker, and she has a large, huge social media following and site, and she's another rising millennial. So finally, I want to couch this as we're creating a new American century. This is what's happening right now. The old century is done. Let's put a stake in it, put a fork in it. The new century is beginning, which is a very exciting thing because it's not written yet. And you in this room can help write it. The conversation's going to be bubbling up amongst this generation that's called the millennials, but it's not going to be written alone by them. It's going to be written by everyone here. And the white space that is open right now is amazing. Who's going to be the Time Inc. of this century? Who's going to be the Williams-Sonoma of this century? It's unclear to me that no one has laid claim to it yet, so it's wide open. And finally, just a few pictures from our book. Last time I said something negative about Martha Stewart was a few years ago, and then I got back to the office, I got a phone call from our PR team, and they said, "You shouldn't have said that. We're not happy with you." And I apologized. and I don't mean it, but because they were pretty powerful. You don't want to mess with Martha. It's really not fun. But with all due respect, she is an amazing person, and I don't know anyone who's worked with her who doesn't have the deepest respect for what she has done and the type of talent and intelligence and skill she has. That's not the point. The point is that every century, every generation needs a new messenger, and I think you can't be that forever. These are homes. These are pictures from our new book, and the point of this book is it's our biggest book ever. Like the house book, this is an homage to Terence Conran. Every home is different. They're not all perfect, and they're big and small. They're all over the country. They're eclectic, and I think that's also true of this new generation. It's all about self-expression. It's about being eclectic. There are no recipes, and it's all about how do you make it yourself. Black walls, and you just love a good black wall these days. That's the book. It's great. Go buy it. It's available on Amazon. It's very cheap. And finally, this was Mary Lee talked about the van that we drove across the country in. I think that if you really want to understand what's going on, you got to get out there. And so we drove across country for 3 weeks and met readers. We visited readers in their homes. We helped them. We did 5 makeovers. I consulted, and it was fascinating. It was amazing. And I have to add one more thing. Sandy Chilowich, I'm sure you're familiar with Chilowich, amazing talent. She said whenever she designs something, she designs 3, and she kills 1 or 2 to get the final one. And then as soon as it goes through to the store, she goes to the store, and usually it's the MoMA store in New York where she lives, and she stands near the shelf where her product is for 2 days and just takes notes on what people do to see if it works. You've got to know your customer. You've got to be out there. There's no comparison for visiting people or seeing people in person. And now we need to get to know the millennials. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Maxwell. We have a few minutes for questions. Who has a question for Maxwell?
Yeah. If you raise your hand, I can remember you, and I'll go right across.
Hi. Kind of along the lines of what you said, I once heard that for boomers in the 50s, we were dictated to, Ed Sullivan for entertainment or Walter Cronkite for news. For Xers, it was more of a conversation, Oprah or Martha. Now it's so disseminated. There's so many different channels, so many different points of information. How do you become a part of the conversation? How do you choose what channels to engage in? Because you can't be everywhere all the time to all the people. And in the Time generation, you made a media plan. There were 8 magazines to choose from. You chose 4 of them. It just seems like there are just so many choices from an advertising or marketing standpoint.
Yeah, unfortunately, the answer is that you can't choose one. You do have to. I think we're in a period of transition right now, so things are popping up all the time. We now are experimenting with Snapchat and what's the other one? Periscope. So what we do is basically you sort of got to always cover 4 bases, and you have to. We publish to the site, we send it out in email, we publish it to Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, and whatever, Tumblr, Instagram, right? So it's a 360, right? Now, stuff comes up all the time, and we go, what about that? We check it out, and it either grows or it fades. So you sort of have to have your stable of paintbrushes of many different sizes, and you do have to use all of them. And then I think over time, you're going to start to see some are going to be the winners and some will fade away. So it will get simpler. I think there's going to be a lot of consolidation. But right now, unfortunately, you sort of got to do it all. Because the audience is completely fractured. It's completely dispersed. And they're not coming to you anymore. You have to go to them. But between Instagram's amazing. And for design, if you just did your blog or a website, Instagram, and Facebook, you'd probably nail most of it. Yeah. Anyone else? Any questions? Right here? Yeah. You can. I'll repeat. Uh-oh.
That's fighting to survive. And don't you? The issue that I see with everything online is the visuals and that tactile and the experience that you get with print. And you're doing books, so...
Why?
Why? I mean, I still fight for the value and what you get from the visuals in print over online. I realize there's a transition, and so we're everywhere. That's what print is doing. We're trying to be everywhere. But how do you... don't you think there's some place for the print?
Yeah, I think, the music industry, if you look at, I don't know if there's an article in New Yorker last year about Spotify, and it was fascinating. If you follow the history of streaming and the disruption in the music industry, it's a little different than the print industry because you can listen to a song on a CD or you can listen to a song streaming, and there's very little difference. There's no qualitative difference there's just different delivery mediums. There is a different experience when you page through a magazine. You open a book or you see it on the web. Absolutely. And I think it's going to be good at one thing. It just unfortunately doesn't get to do everything anymore. So, and as a delivery system, it's not as ubiquitous and it's not as easy to get to, whereas everything's on your phone, right? So I think that if you're going to be in print, it's going to get smaller, right? So you're going to, so you want to figure out where are the ones who are doing things in print that can't be done elsewhere. It's probably going to be a little more higher end, and it's going to have to be better and richer and more of a page experience. And I don't know print well enough to know what that is, but I know there's a lot of people who live in the print world love the format, and there's a whole experience, back of book, front of book, and you move through it, and that is not being replaced. That is its own unique thing, and I just think there's going to be fewer of them, and they're not going to go away. It's just that there'll be fewer trees in the forest, as it were. What I will also say about blogs, when I started in 2004, we were very rudimentary. And so what's happening now is the online world is growing up very quickly, and it's realizing there's a lot of things to learn from the print industry in terms of experience, in terms of art direction, photography, writing. I mean, I wrote everything for the first few years, and I'm not a good writer. You know, people accepted that. They're not going to accept that in 5 years. The online world is raising its game, and they're raising it really fast. In fact, we started working with a woman named Lori Buckle, who worked at she worked at Bon Appetit. She worked at Meredith for many years, and she's sort of a pro in the print world, and we're mining her for her knowledge because we need it. And so I think you're going to start to see, I don't know, if you're in the print world and you want to move to digital, there's going to be a big place for you because I think there's a lot of things we need to know that we don't know, and we're going to learn them. And then on the print side, there'll be, like Arc Digest. Is Arc Digest going to go away? Probably not. There's something about that magazine and the demographic that buys it that's always going to want that. That's a pretty safe bet. Someone else said to me, the thing that happened in magazines, he said, most magazines, he said, were fake. And I said, what do you mean they're fake? He said, well, they're really not real. They don't have a real purpose. They're just advertising confections. So, you know, the business people said, there's advertisers in this space, let's build a magazine around it, we can sell to them. And I hadn't really thought about it before, but I think he's right. And I said, well, what's a real magazine? He said, a real magazine has a real point of view, really good writing, and they tell a story. And I think a lot of magazines don't actually do that. They're too controlled by the advertising side. And so he said Vanity Fair, he thought was an amazing magazine. The New Yorker is an amazing magazine. Business, I'm not saying the business, but in terms of a thing, so real magazines I think will continue to exist.
Thank you, Maxwell. It was a joy having you today.
Great, thank you very much.